with all the amazing artists that you got to work and look at their work and kind of curate this exhibition, what stood out to you most as a kind of, let's say, theme that you feel is really resonating with people and that you feel is really important that it had to be a part of this exhibition?
Well, I think one that's really, really in the public mind at the moment is food waste. And I think because the exhibition was very much saying that we need to look at food not just as this isolated thing that's on your plate, but as something that is part of a system. And that's very much how designers are wanting to think. They sort of don't want to just make products anymore that, feed, well, basically going to end up in landfill. Then they are thinking about their responsibility in a much wider way, and so waste streams, what happens to a product after we use it, is very current, and that's the case with food. I think actually there are two issues. There's the type of food waste that's edible food that gets wasted between being produced and eaten, and I think that underlies in a way the whole exhibition, because it's a symptom of we've come to see food as something that's cheap and throw away, and we kind of don't see the social or the environmental costs in a real way.
Sure.
So I think it's that sort of erosion of, I guess, our sort of respect for food that has turned it into something that's easily disposable. But then also there's a really fun section of the exhibition for me was people kind of doing an amazing amount of research around all the waste streams that relate to food, so human waste and agricultural waste and sort of food waste itself, and using this as the kind of basis for new materials. So kind of growing materials from mycelium, and one of the projects uses waste from tea production in Argentina, mixes that with mushroom mycelium and actually grows objects from it. Coffee cups made from used coffee grounds. A leather alternative that's using the sort of husks from pineapple harvest in the Philippines, where the leather production is actually very destructive. So kind of tapping into all these waste streams to make materials that are sort of fully biodegradable and alternatives to plastics.
And shedding a light on parts of waste that I guess people are completely blind to, right? Because I think in the media we know kind of this common figure put out there that about 30% of what we buy for our homes ends up in waste. And I think that a lot of people are starting to become more sensitive to.
Yeah.
But I think it's all the other waste as well that's generated as part of the process of getting to that part that we
just don't normally see.
We end up wasting. There's plenty of waste throughout the whole kind of chain.
Yeah.
And I think the Bigger Than the Plate exhibition does a great job as well of highlighting that and bringing it to people's awareness, because as I said, I think it's just something that we understand food waste, but I don't think we understand the breadth of it.
And when you start thinking about where ingredients and materials come from and what happens to waste, then you are starting to draw connections between things. And one of my favourite projects in the show is a new material called Totemoxle by a Mexican designer, Fernando Lapos.
Yes, and I'd heard about his work. It was sometime last year, and then I saw he was being featured in the exhibition. His work is beautiful as well. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and it works on quite a lot of different levels. So he's created this beautiful veneer out of the husks from heritage varieties of corn in Mexico that naturally come in this amazing range of creams and reds and pinks. So it's a beautiful material that you can use for furniture, for interiors, and it kind of just naturally celebrates this incredible biodiversity of, all these different varieties of corn that were developed over kind of 10,000 years in Mexico. But what happened is that he'd been studying and working in Europe and returned to Mexico and suddenly found that these corn varieties had disappeared from the markets.
Right.
And in the 90s, Mexico started imported hybrid corn seeds and industrial farming methods, largely from America. And that was kind of pushing out the viability of the native corns, which are also kind of vital to Mexican cuisine.
Yeah.
And then the methods that went with that was kind of eroding land, and so lots of small farmers were having to move to the city. And so he saw this really, really big change around the corn, and then found a village that he knew as a child where they were trying to reinstate the traditional farming practices, and decided that by making this veneer, it could provide a second form of income for the farmers, so it made it more viable for them to go back to growing the native corn varieties. And then, but they didn't know which ones to start replanting, so then he started working with a seed bank, and suddenly the designer became this link between the farmers, the cuisine, the scientists in the seed bank, and the design market where this product was, is now being sold. And I just think that's it's a really fascinating way to think of a design process, is that kind of bridge between, this indigenous knowledge, the science, the flavour. So he's working with essentially a waste material, but that's led to this really deep engagement with agriculture and cooking and the seed bank.